Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape Podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
Esther and Kara, thanks so much for joining us today. Let's start with each of you providing some background on your role at SER and a brief introduction to yourselves and summarizing your career. Kara, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Holly. Great to be with you today. I'm really excited to have my colleague Esther on this podcast as well to talk about this great paper. I'm the director of the Center for Energy Regulation and Policy Analysis at the School of Energy Resources. I've been in that role for about a year and a half. I started my career as an attorney working in water in Wyoming. I started my career at the Attorney General's office working on the Nebraska-Wyoming litigation over the North Platte River. Moved into private practice a few years later where I focused on Wyoming water quantity issues, representing irrigation districts, ranchers, municipalities, etc. In 2013, Governor Meade appointed me to the Public Service Commission, so I became a utility regulator, which is a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is some of the utility regulations going on around natural gas to our Western markets. Reappointed by Governor Gordon in 2019 to the commission for a second term. I became chairman of the commission at that point, took on some additional responsibilities for personnel and budget. So that was an exciting time. Left the commission in January of 2021 to join the Southwest Power Pool, where I focused on their expanding electricity markets into the Western interconnection, the real-time market, the day-ahead market, and the RTO option as well. So, Holly, as you know, I've known you for a long time, and once you became the executive director at School of Energy Resources, we started talking about how I might fit into your vision of how policy gets integrated into the School of Energy Resources, which has historically been a really technically based organization. So it's been exciting to be at the School of Energy Resources, to be able to combine different aspects of my career to date and really try to enhance the policy and regulatory work we're doing for all the exciting energy projects we're working on in Wyoming.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kara. And Esther, how about you?
Well, I started my role as energy policy research professional at CERPA at the end of July of last year. My background is mainly in oil and gas, which started when I went to work for Devon Energy as a public affairs specialist in 2003. In 2012, I moved into the regulatory arena in my role as vice president for public lands at the Petroleum Association in Wyoming. From there, I went to work for Congresswoman Liz Cheney as her senior policy advisor for energy and lands, where I got to broaden my focus to all forms of energy. After she wasn't reelected in 2022, I went back into the Oil and Gas Trade Association realm and worked for Western Energy Alliance until I started working for CERPA in 2023.
Great. And we're so grateful to have both of you here, not just on the podcast, but at SER. Esther, please tell our listeners about current natural gas production in Wyoming and how important it is to the state's economy.
Absolutely. So Wyoming is a major producer and exporter of natural gas, so it plays a vital role in the state's energy industry and economy. In fact, 16 of the 100 largest natural gas fields in the U.S. are located in Wyoming, including the Pinedale, Anacline, and Jonah fields, which rank in the top 10. Just to give you an idea of the presence of natural gas in the state, in 2022, which are the most recent stats that we have right now, the state had 17,800 producing natural gas wells and 25 operating gas plants that process the vast majority of the state's gas production. So we also have 30,000 miles of pipelines located in all 23 of our counties that export most of that natural gas. So with numbers, like that, it's not difficult to see how natural gas is an essential part of the state's economy. While I don't have the natural gas figures alone, it's estimated that 50% of Wyoming's total revenue is funded by minerals, with about 75% of that being attributable to oil and natural gas combined. And just to give you some numbers, in 2022, oil and gas production generated approximately $2.72 billion for the state. in the form of taxes, royalties, and mill levies. And not only that, but in 2021, Wyoming's oil and gas industry directly employed more than 20,000 people in the state with an annual payroll of $3.6 billion. So interestingly, I'm just going to throw this in there, even though Wyoming is among the top 10 in both natural gas reserves and marketed natural gas production, it only consumes about 1/10 of the natural gas it produces, with the remainder being exported to out-of-state customers, mainly in California, Oregon, Nevada, and Washington.
Great. So today we're talking a little bit about a specific paper that CERPA recently put out. The title starts with Headed West, and you alluded to this just now, that our natural gas does generally head west. And so the paper highlights the challenges that Wyoming gas producers face in exporting our gas to those Western markets. Can you explain why we export most of our natural gas to the West as a start?
You bet. So historically, the majority of natural gas produced in Wyoming was exported to the Midwest and West Coast markets through interstate pipelines that cross into Utah, Nebraska, Colorado, and Montana from Wyoming. But then the shale revolution was brought about by technological advancements like hydraulic fracturing, which unlocked prolific amounts of natural gas from shale formations across the U.S. This led to large increases in natural gas production occurring outside Wyoming starting around 2010. So this increase in shale production elsewhere in the U.S. reduced Wyoming's competitive advantage in eastern markets, which resulted in lower pricing on Wyoming natural gas flowing to the east than the natural gas that was flowing to the west. So this effectively pushed Wyoming natural gas out of markets to the east and directed it primarily to the west, again, to California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. So while, Wyoming still has ample production and pipeline capacity to export natural gas to states to the east and south, those options have been limited in recent years due to the competition from growing shale production in areas like the Bakken in North Dakota, Marcellus, and, Pennsylvania and the Permian Basin.
Right. And the paper even includes a map showing where the pressure in production from other areas is happening. So it has been a big change for Wyoming and really challenged our producers. Kara, can trading into these Western markets, which now Wyoming is almost uniquely focused on with our natural gas sales, it presents some unique challenges in the regulatory space. Can you tell our listeners why that is?
Sure. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say we've really faced an onslaught regulations that impact Wyoming's ability to market our natural gas. And this is coming not just from the states that we're exporting to, but from the federal government policies as well. First, we're seeing general challenges to just being able to produce natural gas in the volumes that we have historically done, because a lot of that natural gas is produced on federal lands. And we're seeing repeated new rules, proposed rules from the federal government, the land agencies where this gas is located, such as the Bureau of Land Management, on methane reduction, just on whether they're willing to even lease the parcels for that production. And so we're seeing challenges in the regulatory space just on our ability to actually produce natural gas. Once we produce it, we're facing another layer of regulatory challenges to the specific states that Esther mentioned. Each of those states has passed decarbonizing legislation impacting the entire energy sector. And it really affects natural gas on a couple levels. One, they're just trying to reduce the use of natural gas at all. And the paper talks about entities that are trying to ban natural gas use in buildings, for example, just this general national push towards electrification, which would limit natural gas as used for heating purposes. On the electricity front, though, because of the emissions regulations that are going on in these 4 states, they want to reduce the emissions produced by electricity generation, and that's impacting natural gas as well. So most of them have several layers of regulatory challenges that we can talk about in more detail, but it starts with these statewide policies on GHG emission reductions. And then that filters itself down into several state agencies. The layer of regulatory challenges that I'm particularly interested in based on my experience are the ones that are occurring at the utility commissions of each of these states. What they're doing in terms of limiting natural gas as an electricity generating source, as well as how much they're allowing natural gas to continue to be a heating fuel. So we can talk more about those specific things, but it's challenging for producers in Wyoming to navigate this regulatory framework because it's coming at so many different levels. And then within each state, they're approaching it slightly differently. And so this paper really talks about, identifies what those different challenges are from the statutory to the regulatory. And then I know we'll talk about this in a minute, but it does contain some recommendations that we think can help Wyoming natural gas producers continue to trade into these markets with their product.
Great. And Esther, the paper discusses the positive attributes of Wyoming's low methane intensity natural gas and what is sometimes called differentiated natural gas. Can you explain what those are and how they help Wyoming or could help Wyoming thrive in today's natural gas markets?
Sure. So Wyoming natural gas has relatively low methane and carbon intensity, and that's particularly in comparison to the gas that's produced in other states west of the Mississippi River. And Wyoming producers are also increasing the proportion of what's called differentiated natural gas, or DNG, being produced in the state, which is reduced carbon intensity natural gas that's verified through monitoring and measurement. So taken together, these positive attributes can be capitalized upon to help Wyoming to preserve its market share and expand it in the states that we've mentioned earlier, California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, and while at the same time creating additional market opportunities elsewhere in the region. I'd also like to mention that these opportunities are further supported by Wyoming's leadership in the related technological areas of carbon capture, use, and storage, or CCUS, as well as hydrogen produced from natural gas with CCUS. With the critical role that oil and gas plays in Wyoming's economy, all of these factors are of vital importance to the state, and we should be capitalizing on those.
Great. So a few fun facts about the School of Energy Resources and the University of Wyoming and how we've worked with Wyoming's natural gas producers that everyone might not know. So first, I don't know if you guys know this, but Zhang Jiao, who is a program manager here at the School of Energy Resources working in the Center for Economic Geology Research. At one point in his career, he was at NerdGas, the McMurray company. He helped discover the Jonah Field, which I did not know. And if you know Dr. Jiao, he's incredibly humble and he probably would never tell anyone that, but I heard it from someone else. So that was one fun fact. It also helps you see what kind of folks we have working here and the level of expertise. So always grateful to work with him. I think the other thing I wanted to flag was collaboration between SER and other parts of the university and our Wyoming's natural gas producers on this very topic. So there was a point in history where particularly producers in the Jonah Field were having ozone events to the point where there was a risk that they would need to stop their operations. So, and this is our big field that is producing most of our natural gas in Wyoming now. And what happened was these producers, particularly Jonah Energy and the company that is now called Pure West, worked with SER's Center for Air Quality, which is in the Atmospheric Sciences Department here in the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences. It's led by a professor named Shane Murphy. And that group was really interested in measuring methane emissions. Well, it wasn't really methane that was causing ozone. It was VOCs, volatile organic compounds. But they were able to help the producers find emissions of both, of VOCs and methane. And the producers really took it seriously, reducing those emissions. They worked with Wyoming's Department of Environmental Quality and were able to dramatically reduce their emissions, really reduce the ozone events, and continue operating and continue providing natural gas, that incredible form of energy, and also, obviously, the associated revenue that comes to the state of Wyoming. And it was a partnership that I always like to highlight because these are not huge producers. They didn't have a ton of resources, but it really helps you see what a land grant university working with its energy production sector can accomplish. So super proud of that. And actually that collaboration is continuing today. So really a lot of kudos both to the producers, to the team here at UW, and to DEQ, and anyone else who was involved that I'm probably missing because it all happened before I even got here. But it's a great story of what we can accomplish if we work together. And now, as you alluded to, Esther, these companies are actually they're at the front of what we think may be a differentiated gas market, where they may get paid more because they really truly are offering a different product. And it's not just about methane, it's all about reclamation and community engagement and a whole spectrum of work that these companies have done. But just wanted to go back and give that a little background on the foundation. So,
and Holly, I might just jump in here really quick. It's a great opportunity for us to give a shout out to those companies and to Dr. Murphy in their collaborative assistance with this paper. Kelly Bott and Paul Ulrich from the companies that you mentioned, as well as Dr. Murphy, have been incredibly helpful to us in putting this paper together, as well as the next step of this paper, which is one of the recommendations. I don't mean to jump to the end, but pursuing certification, standardization, and how we might do that. And the next step of this will involve some heavy collaboration with Dr. Murphy's group in terms of the data that they have collected, as well as what Pure West and Jonah Energy are doing on certification programs. And so we're looking forward to the next step of this, of how we can assist natural gas producers in Wyoming to achieve that certification if they desire to do so. I know that both of those companies have been able to do sort of one-off contracts in the vein that you're talking about in terms of a premium product. We'd like to help make that a broader application with wide acceptance in the 4 states that we've been talking about. But can't thank those 3 individuals enough for all their help in this paper, and we're looking forward to the next steps in continuing our collaboration.
That's great. That's a good point. That it is not something we need to talk about in the past. It's something that's actually expanding, and I think there's certainly engagement from the Wyoming Energy Authority as well. So lots of us all rowing in the same direction. So, Kara, the paper concludes with some specific recommendations to address the challenges that we've been discussing. So we definitely have opportunities. We also still have challenges for our natural gas sector. Can you summarize those recommendations, what you think, in addition to what you just talked about? What else can we do?
We were really excited about the opportunity in this paper to provide specific recommendations. Our research doesn't always result in being able to identify specific action items that we think Wyoming can take to promote different things. Sometimes more often we're simply providing information, but this one, we had the opportunity to provide some real recommendations. So we're excited about that. I talked about one of them already, which is continuing to collaborate with Wyoming industry and Dr. Murphy's group on this certification concept. So that'll be coming next. But a couple of the other recommendations, the first one is really targeted at our policymakers. We have been fortunate in Wyoming that we have a Wyoming legislature, and the governors have been highly supportive of Wyoming energy. And this first recommendation is really targeted to them, to have them sort of step up their engagement efforts. We believe there is real gain to be had by direct engagement of a select number of our Wyoming legislators with their counterparts in these 4 states. And we think that's a few things. First, it's just education about what Wyoming natural gas attributes are and how they fit into their decarbonizing policies. I think there's a natural tendency to think those are inconsistent. And so education efforts to just educate them about the fact that our Wyoming natural gas is compatible. And I think that's coming at an interesting time when policymakers in those states are having a greater recognition of the ongoing need for natural gas, especially in electricity generation. So we think that's a good opportunity for them to engage directly with them and talking about energy security, reliability attributes, and the inherent climate benefits of Wyoming natural gas. The second recommendation is really focused at the Wyoming Energy Authority, which you mentioned as well. Executive Director Rob Krieger is doing a great job of putting his team together and really refocusing on specific areas of Wyoming's energy portfolio. And one of those is in the natural gas area. And so we recommend that Wyoming policymakers, again, support WEA's effort to, in their mission to encourage and promote Wyoming energy, that they be given the resources to adequately undertake direct engagement with several entities. And we've listed those in the report where they need to be at California, which has a maybe more complex regulatory framework than the other states. But direct engagement, again, focusing awareness on the low methane intensity attributes of Wyoming's natural gas. The third recommendation we've talked about already, which is really directed at the School of Energy Resources to continue our work on certification collaboratively with Wyoming industry, as well as Dr. Murphy's group, to apply some data and some best practices that we've seen and how certification might go and how we might assist generally within the Wyoming natural gas producers to help them achieve certification if that's something that they want to do. And the last recommendation is in regard to the Wyoming Integrated Test Center, which right now is pretty focused on full carbon capture. And so it just makes a recommendation that the ITC could be used to be looking at natural gas issues as well. Construct a flue gas dilution system at the ITC that would dilute flue gas to simulate natural gas instead of just coal. So we think there's some really good technological opportunities for this work as well at the ITC.
And just for anyone who's not familiar, the ITC is essentially, it's a carbon capture test site that is using coal-fired power plant flue gas to allow technology developers to test their technologies. And it could actually be used for coal or gas, is what you're saying. And I love that our recommendations do not leave us without extra work. We even give ourselves new work in our recommendations. And I would really encourage folks to go look at the paper or at least the briefing that you're preparing, or that is, I guess it's been published at this point, and look at the map. We're not just talking about something, these are all quantified attributes in terms of low methane intensity. So you can look at the map that was actually done by researchers elsewhere. So we did not do that, but it's a great reference to show that Wyoming gas truly does have a lower methane intensity than many of our neighbors and many of the West Coast suppliers like Arizona. So really encourage folks to go look at the paper and the brief as well. So I appreciate you both for all your hard work. Thank you so much, and for being here on our podcast. So we always like to wrap up by letting our listeners learn a little bit more about our guests on a different topic area. So Kara, tell our listeners something about your favorite place in Wyoming, or something you want our listeners to know about you. And I know this is challenging because you've already done a podcast, but you have to do it again. So keep thinking of refreshing this story.
Well, actually, the only podcast I've done is interviewing you. So I don't think I got to answer that question. I think you did.
Okay.
So on the question about my favorite place in Wyoming, it is impossible for me to pick. I was fortunate in the early stages of my career, as I said, as a water lawyer. I had cases in every corner of this state. And one of the last years that I was in private practice, I actually kept track of the map of Wyoming and how many different roads I had been on and how many miles I traveled in Wyoming. And I challenged myself to take a new route if I could, to take a state highway here and there. So it was a really interesting experiment, and I think I logged about 30,000 miles that year across the state of Wyoming. And I have to say, there really is not one place in Wyoming I don't enjoy. There's always something to look at. Obviously, our exposure to nature and our ability to be out and have solitude and enjoy Mother Nature is an incredible advantage to living here. But every community has their own character. They're proud of it. They love where they live, and they've done a great job of whether it's a museum or other things. So this is a really difficult question for me because I love every nook and cranny of the state of Wyoming.
Okay, well, I want you to know that I do not let other people get away with that, what you just did, but that's okay. I'm going to let you just this one time. I don't let people say everywhere. Esther?
Yes. So
you know what you're not allowed to say. How do you want to answer that one?
Yeah. So I went down the same road, kind of, the same thing, just so many wonderful and beautiful places that I really couldn't pick one favorite. So I just thought, I'll just mention one that's close to home where I spend a lot of time and enjoy hiking with my dogs. And that's the Bridle Trail on Casper Mountain.
Perfect. That's very specific. Nice job. Well, that concludes our questions for this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me and for all the work you do here at SER and the CERPA and for this great paper. So look forward to doing the next one. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.